A billionaire woman came to collect rent and froze. When she heard the little boy whisper, "I'm hungry." For 3 years, an 8-year-old boy was held captive in a small, dusty storage room behind Brenda's Bargains, a gaudy retail store, in the middle of the high street. Everyone passed by, but no one really looked. He was neglected, emotionally starved, and forced into silence. No one reported it, no one suspected, until a woman stopped, looking directly at the truth the whole town had inadvertently turned away from. Her small act brought a great secret to light. Leo woke up before it was fully light, not because of an alarm, and certainly not because someone called him, but because of the familiar sound of footsteps from the old hallway. The dragging of heavy, labored slippers, followed by a sharp knock on the door as if trying to knock down the small room. "Get up. There's a pile of inventory that isn't sorted." Brenda's curt voice echoed in like a dry, harsh wind. Leo groggily sat up from the thin mattress, pulling the frayed too-big t-shirt over his body. His eyes weren't wide open, not because he was still sleepy, but because they had learned to avoid all light, even the first rays of the day. The rickety, wooden table placed close to the small, grimy window was his workspace, also where he ate and where he took naps. On the table, dozens of coarse fabric samples were stacked, stray threads and buttons scattered. A few rolled-up bandages, the only thing he had to treat the deep paper cuts on his hands. The fabric samples were rough, but he still had to sort them. Leo carefully separated the tiny buttons, pursing his lips to keep his hands from shaking. Just one misplaced button, and Brenda would be angry. Angry enough to use the heavy wooden ruler to teach him a lesson. A noise behind him. He didn't turn around. Brenda placed a chipped plastic plate on the table, containing some cold, congealed pasta mixed with a few wilted greens and a piece of dried, mangled bread. She didn't say anything more. Just pushed hard, causing the plate to hit the edge of the table, almost falling to the floor. "Eat quickly, work quickly, and if you mess up again, don't blame me." Then she disappeared, as if Leo was air, existing but not something anyone was obliged to notice. Leo picked up the plastic spoon, scooping up a little pasta. The taste was cold and as salty as tears. But he didn't cry. It had been a long time since tears had appeared. Perhaps his body had also learned to conserve everything, both blood and emotion. After breakfast, Leo continued to sort. Each separation was an extreme act of caution. He knew the punishment for carelessness. Mid-morning, he stopped, stood up, and walked to the window. The room had no clock, but Leo always estimated the time by the sounds outside. The school bell, the voices of children calling to each other on the street. Today, too, outside, the children wore backpacks and clean clothes, their mouths laughing brightly. Under the radiant sunlight, Leo rested his forehead against the window pane, one cheek marked with peeling paint. He didn't dream of anything big, just thought of a new crayon, a book with a picture of a rocket, or a name tag to wear on his chest. Brenda said he wasn't smart enough to go to school. School is for children who know how to obey. Leo didn't dare ask again. A crooked stack. Leo frantically tried to restack it, but it was too late. The pile toppled for almost 2 centimeters. Footsteps sounded faster than usual. The door burst open, and Brenda's voice ripped through the room. "Messed! Up again? How many times have I told you?" She snatched a piece of fabric, held it up to examine it, and then said nothing more. Her hand, holding the heavy wooden ruler, which she always kept near the cash register, swung up. A whizzing sound, then a blow to Leo's back. He flinched, but the second blow hit his shoulder. The third, his upper arm, causing a small toy car to fall to the ground. He didn't scream or plead. He just bowed his head, his hands clenching the edge of his too large shirt. The only sounds in the room were his gasping breath and the ruler striking the floor as Brenda left. He sat there for a while, his hands numb. The toy car had fallen somewhere, but Leo didn't dare look for it. His back burned, but there was no one to wipe it, no clean water to wash it. He went to the small, grimy basin, turned on the tap. The dripping water seemed to mock her. An old puddle spread across the tiled floor, full of a moldy smell. Leo took an old, torn cloth, wet it lightly, and used his trembling hands to clean the wound. Outside, Brenda was watching TV. The screen flickered, the changing light constantly reflecting on the wall. A lively game show echoed with the laughter of the audience. That laughter sent a chill down his spine, not because of the volume, but because it was so far away. For Leo, laughter no longer belonged to human beings. Night fell. After a cold dinner of a few hard pieces of stale bread, Leo sat silently at his desk. He no longer had the strength to sort, but didn't dare lie down to sleep. The dim yellow light reflected on the wall, casting the shadow of a thin child in a rickety chair. In the drawer, there were a few scraps of colorful fabric that Brenda hadn't noticed. He secretly picked them up from previous sorting sessions, hiding them carefully in an old shoebox. Tonight, Leo decided to do something he had been thinking about for months. Sew a small fabric creature, not to play with, but to have someone to be with. The fabric was carefully folded. He used gray thread to sew gentle curves, creating a simple shape. A round head, 2 tiny paws. He didn't know how to draw a face, so he left it blank, like himself. He sewed each stitch with his left hand because his right hand was bruised. The wind blew through the crack in the door, flipping over. Last month's electricity bill, which hadn't been paid. Leo saw the number but didn't know if it was big or small. He had never learned how to read bills. He only knew that when that number appeared, Brenda would be angry again. Leo carefully cut a strand of bright blue thread, the only one left, in the box, to make fur for his creature. The blue was like the sky he had never stood under for more than 10 minutes. He placed the creature next to his pillow. He looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll draw your eyes." His voice was as soft as a breath. Outside the window, the wind blew gently, but the room didn't have a real window, just a piece of frosted glass fixed in place, impossible to open. No one heard Leo's words. No one knew that tonight was the first time he had spoken to anyone after many weeks of only silence. He closed his eyes. Beside him, the nameless creature lay on its side, looking up at the ceiling as if waiting for a dream. Leo didn't cry, not because he was strong, but because he had forgotten how to shed tears. The April sun in downtown London wasn't fierce, but it was persistent, like the sun itself was tired of shining down on this place. Eleanor Vance sat in the sleek black electric car, stopped in front of a row of struggling high-street businesses. The gaudy storefronts, taped-up windows, and rusty mottled tin roofs all created a picture that was both familiar and forgettable. "We could tear it all down and rebuild," suggested her young assistant, standing next to her. "There's nothing to keep." Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She quietly got out of the car, holding a tablet, her eyes sweeping from the dry planters to the moss growing on the base of the walls. "Number 7. Dilapidated as it is, this is still a livelihood for many people in difficult circumstances," she said, her voice steady. "We still need to calculate carefully." The young assistant hesitated. Eleanor didn't need to hear more. For her, this wasn't just a property inspection. It was confronting an old failure, a promise she had broken 5 years ago. She had sponsored a small business incubator for struggling entrepreneurs, hoping to bring about a new beginning. But only 6 months later, the main tenant defaulted due to poor management, and a small, hopeful venture collapsed. The advisory board took the blame, the project manager was fired, but that loss, although not directly hers, still made her never fully trust reports again. Since then, each year, she personally selected a few locations from hundreds of properties, coming to inspect them without warning. She didn't believe in reports. She only believed in what she saw, and no one could see for her. This block of retail units belonged to a charity she founded, specializing in low-rent spaces for single-parent businesses and the unemployed. On paper, everything was normal. Rent, collected regularly, no tenant complaints, technical reports saying satisfactory. But when Eleanor stepped into the narrow alleyway between the two rows of shops, she felt something different. Not exactly a sound, but a feeling. A feeling that someone was watching, but not strong enough to call out. She slowed down as she approached Brenda's Bargains. The back door was old and peeling, no delivery schedule, no sound. The windows were covered with coarse cloth from the inside, making it impossible to see clearly. But what made Eleanor stop wasn't the old appearance, but the excessive silence. While the other units had radios, fans, cooking sounds, children's footsteps, this shop seemed cut off from the rest of the world. "Is this unit still occupied?" she asked her assistant. Yes, a widow, Brenda Jenkins, and a distant relative's child she took in after their parents passed. Eleanor nodded, saying nothing more. She took a few more steps, about to turn away, when a very small sound rang out, like metal falling to the floor. She turned back. A crack in the curtains moved. Slightly, just a little, but enough to make her come closer. She stood right under the window, and then, through the thin, dull gray curtain, she saw a scene that made time seem to freeze. An elderly woman, tall, thin, with disheveled gray-brown hair, was holding a wooden ruler, striking a little boy who was hunched over on the floor. Each blow hit his back, his shoulders, and even the wooden floor. The boy didn't cry, didn't call out, didn't resist. He just covered his head, curling up like a dried leaf being crushed. But what made Eleanor choke wasn't the woman's actions, but the child's eyes. In a brief moment when he looked up, his eyes staring straight at her, there was no plea for help, no tears, just a look tired, hauntingly silent, as if he had seen hundreds of people pass by, but no one really saw him. Eleanor stepped back. She didn't know how. She turned and hurried away, leaving the assistant behind asking something indistinct. Back in the car, she sat silently. Her hand rested on the steering wheel, shaking slightly. Throughout the drive, home, she didn't say anything. Red lights and green lights, car horns, music from the radio, everything slipped away as if she was sitting underwater. That evening, she didn't go home but stopped by the office. The lights were off, only the light. From the laptop screen reflected on her unlined face. She opened the property file. The first page was a satellite image. Brenda's Bargains, a small square located between other squares, was nothing special, but she couldn't take her eyes off it. She flipped the page, scrolled down to the list of residents. Brenda Jenkins, renting from 3 years ago. No one living with her, no children, no further notes. She closed the laptop. All night, Eleanor didn't sleep. The boy's icy gaze through the dusty glass kept appearing in her head, an expression that didn't beg, didn't plead, but therefore struck straight into her conscience. No one looks at a child like that if they have nothing to hide, and no one endures like that if they don't know that no one will come to save them. The next morning, when her assistant walked in, Eleanor said, her voice hoarse and low, "Start." Rechecking all guardianship records at the retail complex, all of them from the beginning. And from that day, an invisible string between Eleanor and Brenda's Bargains was tied again. Not because of duty, and not because of law, but because for the first time in many years, she realized there are looks powerful enough to stir an entire life. Eleanor returned to the retail complex 3 days later. No specific plan, no papers, in hand, and no one with her. She stopped the car in the same spot, turned off the engine, lowered the car window a bit to hear the sounds of the high street. The wind blowing through the iron fence, the barking of dogs echoing from the empty lot, the sound of bicycle wheels rolling on gravel, and the absolute silence from Brenda's bargains. Like last time, this time she didn't go right up to the window, just stopped across the street. In her hand, she carried a small paper bag. Inside was a crispy cinnamon roll, 2 old comic books bought from a liquidation bookstore, and an unsigned letter. She put the paper bag down on the steps, knocked lightly on the door, and turned away without waiting. She wanted to let the person behind that door choose. Leo opened the door when the sun had gone down, past the roof across the street. He didn't come out, just peeked through the door, looked around, and then bent down to pick up the paper bag, as if afraid someone was watching. His eyes scanned each item inside, the cinnamon roll, the worn comic book covers, the paper wrapping with a faint smell of strangers, but no name, no message. He put everything on the table gently, as if touching a luxury item. The fragrant smell of bread made his stomach growl, but Leo didn't dare eat it right away. He wrapped it in an old cloth, stuffing it under the small cot where he still hid the things he wasn't ready to lose. He flipped through the pages of the comic book, simple drawings, robots wearing hats, talking to each other in a gentle language. A robot holding the hand of a small alien, walking through a forest with a small house where everyone greets each other every morning with a smile. Leo read that, and then stopped. Night fell. Brenda came home late that day after visiting a supplier. She walked in with a bag of ready-made food, put it heavily on the table, her eyes glancing around as usual. Then she stopped. The book. She picked it up, flipped through a few pages, then turned to look at Leo. "Where did this come from?" Leo didn't answer, standing still. "I'm asking you. Are you mute?" Still silent. The only answer could bring one thing, a beating. So he chose silence, like so many times before. Brenda snatched the book, went straight to the backyard where the old incinerator was still warm with embers. She threw the book into the fire, like throwing a piece of trash, without hesitation. Leo stood behind the door, looking through the crack. The fire flickered, swallowing the image of the robot and the alien. The paper burned, twisting, turning black, then falling like dead butterflies. He bit his lip, not because he regretted a book, but because he had just lost something he hadn't had time to name. That night, when Brenda was asleep, Leo quietly went to the yard. He used a small piece of firewood to push around the ashes, looking for pages that hadn't burned. 2 pieces of paper were left, warped, scorched, but still readable. One of the 2 pieces had only one line. "You deserve to, beloved." Leo sat down, his hands trembling as he smoothed out the piece of paper. The dim moonlight shone down enough to see the printed words, thin as hair. He repeated that sentence in his head like a forgotten spell. Then he folded it up, stuffing it into the fabric creature he had sewn the night before. On the other side of the street, in a car, Eleanor witnessed everything. She saw the boy come out, rummaging through the ashes with his bare hands, picking up the scraps that no one wanted to keep. She didn't hear his voice, but she felt a quiet reverence in every movement. No one picks up ashes if it wasn't once fire. No one keeps a burnt piece of paper if the words on it have no meaning to them. Eleanor leaned her head against the driver's seat. Her hand rested on her chest where her heart tightened as if a string was squeezing it. For the first time in many years, she felt afraid. Not afraid of Brenda, not afraid of the system, but afraid that if she didn't do anything, that look would go out, and that child would no longer believe in anyone. The next morning, she returned to the office. No meetings, no reading reports. Then she called attorney Sarah Chen, a sharp corporate lawyer who had once helped her navigate a complex hostile takeover. "We need to meet," she said. "This time it's not a lawsuit but a child." And in the small room across the street, Leo woke up with a strange feeling. Not relieved, not safe, but something like warmth still lingered on the cold stone. He took the creature, opened the seam, checked the piece of paper, still there. The words were still there. You deserve to be loved. No one knew that on that morning, Leo kept his left hand on his chest longer than usual, as if he was checking if his heart still existed. Eleanor wasn't a police officer and she wasn't an investigator. She didn't have the skill to find clues, and she didn't know how to ask indirectly to extract information. But she had intuition, something she had learned after many years of running businesses where pretense was packaged as a high-end product. And she had one more thing: the time to observe and the silence for people to voluntarily say things no one asked. After the day she personally witnessed Brenda beating Leo, she started returning to the retail complex more often. She didn't try to approach the little boy, and she didn't directly confront the woman. She walked around the block, sat at the corner cafe, bought an old newspaper at the newsstand, just to have a reason to stand nearby. She listened to the greengrocer talk about the difficult owner of Brenda's bargains across the street. Listened to an old woman say that she once saw the little boy from Brenda's bargains being pushed down but not daring to cry. And listened to the delivery man say that every time he came to deliver, he only saw the little boy's hand come out to receive the package, never saw his face. From those fragmented pieces, the name Marcus Thorne was repeated, not because he talked a lot, but because he was the last person to work for Brenda and then suddenly quit. That's when Eleanor went to the small electronics repair shop where Marcus worked, not as a billionaire, but just as a woman who had seen a child being beaten in broad daylight and couldn't ignore it. Marcus Thorne worked in a small electronics repair shop about 6 blocks away from the retail complex where Leo lived. He wasn't special, short, his hands rough from stiff wires and metal, but when Eleanor mentioned Brenda Jenkins, he suddenly fell silent. Then he stood up, locked the shop door from the inside, and pulled out a small, faded, fabric-covered notebook from the drawer. "No one believed me when I spoke," he began, his voice strangely calm. "So I wrote it down." In the notebook were lines of steady handwriting, date, time, names of the workers, hours worked, and special notes. Eleanor turned to the page that read Leo B. It appeared 7 times. Next to each line were small, stinging notes. Swollen. Fingers can't hold tools. New tear on his back. Can't sit for long. He doesn't speak, eyes staring at the wall all day. Last time, blood on his shirt. I gave him a cloth, he hid it. Marcus said lightly, as if talking about the weather. At first I thought Leo was a relative. Then I knew he was a distant relative's child. But when I asked, Brenda said the boy is mute. He looked up at Eleanor. But I've never heard anyone mute who knows how to cry so silently. Eleanor left the shop with the copied notebook. Her hand gripped the steering wheel tightly, but her mind drifted somewhere else. That sentence, crying silently, was like a lock twisting into her chest. She thought of Leo's eyes that weren't wet, weren't red, but always hid something broken. The next person she sought was Dr. Evelyn Reed, a child psychologist who used to work with vulnerable children in the area the year Leo should have been in preschool. She lived in a cramped apartment on the 2nd floor of an old building. When she saw Eleanor, she was slightly surprised but didn't refuse to meet, perhaps because she had been waiting for someone to come for many years. "That little boy," Dr. Reed said, her fingers caressing a small handkerchief on her lap. "He only came to the community center for 2 weeks. Didn't talk, didn't play with anyone, but drew. Drew constantly. But the things he drew, houses without doors, people without mouths." Eleanor was silent. "I reported it to the social work department," Dr. Reed continued. "Sent 3 letters. All 3 were returned saying that the center has no right to interfere in legitimate family matters. After that, I was reminded for interfering too much. Leo disappeared from the program. I never saw him again. A week later, attorney Sarah Chen, Eleanor's corporate lawyer, appeared with a file in hand. "You guessed right," Sarah said, opening a faded printout. "Brenda Jenkins never had official guardianship. The ex-husband, Leo's father, died in a traffic accident, leaving behind assets of nearly $2 million, but the will didn't specify who would receive it on behalf of the child." "So why didn't anyone check?" Eleanor asked. "Because no one wanted to check," Sarah laughed softly, bitterly. "The file was submitted through the property broker. The guardianship certificate was an uncertified copy. No one bothered to verify. In the eyes of the law, Leo is a child with a caregiver. That was enough for no one to touch it." Finally, Eleanor sought out Mr. Henderson, the retired social worker. The old man was silent when he heard Leo's name. "That little boy came to my outreach office once," he said, his voice like mixed with wind. "Not to report, but to ask." "Ask what?" He looked at Eleanor, his eyes seeming to see through the soul of the person opposite. "If I tell all the bad things, will I be punished? If I say it, will people believe it? If I hate my guardian, am I a bad child?" The last question, Mr. Henderson lowered his voice, almost whispering, "is if I disappear. Will anyone remember?" Marcus, Evelyn, Sarah, and Mr. Henderson had each tried to do something, but each person, each time, had failed because they stood alone, because what was protecting Brenda's wrongdoing was too big of a system and too little of a heart, because there were walls that only knew how to keep secrets, but no one was loud enough to break them. Until now. Until they started connecting the fragmented pieces, piecing together from the notebook, the burnt piece of paper, the look in the community center, and even the whisper in the outreach office. That evening, in the small office where the soft light shone on the old file pages, 4 people sat around a wooden table. No lawyers, no police, just the people who had once been helpless. Sarah put the file down. "We don't have much time. If she feels she's being watched, she may very well run away." Eleanor nodded. Marcus held in his hand the photo of the notebook. Evelyn was silent, her hand gripping the edge of her shirt. Mr. Henderson closed his eyes as if praying. No one said it, but they all knew this was no longer a legal matter. This was a promise, a final promise for a child that no one had chosen to stand on his side. For the first time after years of trying alone, they were no longer alone. And hope, for the first time, had a place to begin to sprout. Brenda's bargains had been especially quiet these past few days, not because things were more peaceful, but because that silence seemed to be intentionally created by Brenda. She doesn't yell as much as before, doesn't smash things, doesn't raise her ruler, but observes Leo more closely, like a cat watching a mouse. Not needing to pounce, just sitting there is enough to make the other party not dare to breathe heavily. "No dinner," she said when Leo finished sorting the last pile of inventory, with only one item left. "You're punished for being late." Leo hadn't eaten properly for 3 days, but he's used to it. A hungry stomach can cramp up, then it will fade away. But his eyes haven't been seeing clearly lately. Everything seems blurred, sticking, together in one streak. Even the light from the dim yellow light bulb hanging from the ceiling becomes blurred. "If you sleep, you won't wake up early," Brenda continued, her voice even like a saying repeated for many years. "As long as you're breathing, you have to work. That's your fate, you hear?" That night, Leo had to sort until 3 in the morning. Each time his head fell to the table, he was woken up by a loud knock on the wooden door. No one in the retail complex heard, or if they did, they didn't want to hear. When the last item was sorted, Leo quietly stood up, walking towards the corner of the room. He didn't sleep, just sat hugging his knees, resting his chin on his hands as if trying to keep himself from dissolving. The fabric creature was still there, the only thing not taken away. Leo hugged it, his hand stroking the worn thread through the fur made of blue thread. Dust covered a thin layer on the creature's fur. Leo didn't wipe it off. He felt it looked more like him that way. The next morning, when Leo opened the back door to take out the trash, he saw a vibrant green leaf lying on the windowsill, small, pure and fragile. Strange. Nothing else. No food, no paper, just a leaf. He looked around. No one outside. No car sounds, no people. Ben. He was sure it was his friend. Leo bent down, carefully picked up the leaf, hiding it in his pocket. He didn't dare look at it for long, not because he was afraid of being caught, but because he didn't want to hope. Hope makes people weak. But Brenda saw. In the afternoon, when he carelessly left his pocket hanging open on the hook, Brenda found it. "Where did this come from?" she asked, the green leaf lying in her hand as if it was a dirty object. Leo stood, still not answering. She looked at him for a while, then lowered her hand under her heel. She crushed the leaf until no part was intact. Worthless thing. No anger, no shouting, just a calm stomp. But Leo felt like someone was stepping on his own heart. That evening, he couldn't fall asleep. The hunger now was no longer cramping, but became something heavy, lying in his chest. Leo sat in the dark, holding the creature, whispering very softly to it, as if afraid of hearing himself. In the end, no one's coming to save us, are they? The creature didn't answer, but he didn't expect an answer. He just needed someone. To hear him, even if it was fabric and thread. On the third consecutive sleepless night, Leo began to hear a buzzing in his ears. He didn't know if it was a real sound or an imagination. Everything seemed to slow down. His hand held the small tools, but couldn't fix the toy. His fingers bled, but he didn't feel anything. Then suddenly, he screamed. Not because of pain, not because of fear, but because the pressures in his heart had been suppressed for too long. The scream wasn't loud, but it echoed enough to make him dizzy. Leo himself froze, as if not believing it came from him. Brenda woke up from the room, outside. "Are you crazy?" she snapped, yelling at this hour. Leo looked at her, his eyes not resentful, not remorseful, just eyes that seemed to be awakened after a long, long sleep. Brenda suddenly fell silent. For the first time, she didn't say anything more. She came closer, but didn't raise her hand. She looked at Leo and suddenly saw that something had changed. No longer a look of resignation and not of opposition, but a threatening emptiness. As if this child was about to no longer be a child, about to no longer be the obedient little boy she could control. When Brenda left, Leo collapsed to the floor. No more tears and no more anger, just a void that had just opened in his heart, a void wide enough for something to creep in. Not hope, but the need to live, to step out of this room, out of the doors that are always locked, out of the shadow of the woman who sees him as property. Leo didn't know what that was called. He only knew that he had just heard his own voice, for the first time in many months. Outside, the wind blew through the crack in the door, carrying with it a crushed green petal. It rolled into a corner of the wall, lay there distorted, but not yet dissolved. The evening breeze blew through the alleyway of the retail building, making the warped iron door creak like a groan. Eleanor stood in front of Brenda's bargains, holding a stack of documents and a legitimate reason to knock on the door. "We are conducting routine safety checks," she said, looking directly at Brenda, who had just opened the door less than a third of her face. "There's nothing to check," she replied coldly. "My shop is fine. Nothing is broken." "We need to confirm. To ensure proper procedure, all units must be checked in this round." Brenda laughed dryly. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" Eleanor was silent, not denying, not retreating. In the brief silence between the two, Leo stood behind the thin curtain, quietly looking out. No one knew he was there, but he saw everything clearly. The woman's eyes, calm but determined, and the landlady's hand clenching the doorknob as if about to break it. "Go away," Brenda said, her voice dry. "If you don't have a warrant, I won't open the door." Then she slammed it shut. The sound of the bolt locking was heavy, like an ending. Outside, Eleanor slowly walked out into the alleyway, stopping under the shade of a parked van. In her pocket was a copy of the file Sarah had just completed that morning, with full legal basis for a lawsuit, except for one thing, the confirmation of Leo himself. "We have everything," Sarah had said as she put the file on the table, except for the little boy's voice. "The boy doesn't speak," Eleanor replied, her eyes staring into the distance, "or has never been allowed to speak." In the small room, Leo held his fabric creature, quietly opening the seam in the back where he had once hidden the first piece of paper, the words that had survived from the comic book, "You deserve to be loved." Next to that piece of paper today, he stuffed another piece, smaller, written in his own trembling handwriting. "If anyone finds this, I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to go with her. I want to stay." After writing, his hands trembled. Not because he was afraid of being discovered, but because for the first time, he wrote something so clear, not vague, not imagined, but the truth. And the truth is sometimes more frightening than silence. That same afternoon, Ben, the neighbor boy, left a small bag of candies, as always. But this time, inside, there was also a piece of paper folded in quarters. Leo picked it up without letting anyone see. He opened the paper in the corner of the room where the light from the window fell enough to read a child's writing, but neat. "I know you're not invisible. I see you every day. If you can't speak, then I'll speak for you." No signature, but he knew only Ben would write that. Leo put the piece of paper on his palm. He didn't cry, but his chest throbbed with each light beat. Not like pain, but like when someone first touches a scab. A vague feeling between injury and revival. He turned the piece of paper over, wrote a thank you with a blunt pencil, then hid it under the loose brick behind the windowsill where he knew Ben often peeked through. That night, Leo didn't sleep. He hugged the creature sitting in the corner of the cot, his eyes wide open in the dark, not waiting for anyone, not hoping anyone would come. But in his heart, there was a small movement, like when he saw a seed sprout in a clear glass of water, even though no one believed it could live. For the first time in a long time, he imagined himself being saved. Not like a dream. Not flying. Away. Not someone hugging him and running away from this place, but as simple as being taken by the hand and led across the threshold, and then someone saying, "Let's go home." He had never heard anyone say that, but he thought if someone said it, that would be the person he would believe. He sat for a long time, his fingers tracing the thread of the creature's fur, imagining another hand. Not the hand that gripped his collar and dragged him away, but the hand that was warm enough to hold when he let go. If I leave this place, who will call my name first? Leo thought. He had never been called by name with affection. He wanted that. Not big, not bustling, just someone to remember his name. Not call him the boy, not call him it, but call him Leo. Brenda paced around the cramped living room, unable to sleep. She felt something was wrong, a feeling of being watched, surrounded, but no one knocked on the door again, no letters, no police. She looked at Leo. The boy was sitting quietly by the bed, his eyes not closed, and suddenly saw him differently, not oppositional, not defiant, but disturbingly still. She didn't know that in that darkness Leo was no longer afraid. He had tasted a morsel of something called someone on the other side. And a child who knows that he has someone on the other side of the door will not be silent forever. Light footsteps sounded in the hallway outside. Someone passed by, not stopping. But for Leo, those footsteps were a signal. Not the landlady's footsteps, not the sound of threats, but the sound of a person, real, existing outside his world. And those footsteps, as thin as the sound of paper rustling in the middle of the night, had sown a very small seed. It wasn't enough to bloom into belief, but enough to let him know he wasn't being completely swallowed up by this shop. There was a way out, even if he couldn't see it, even if it was just a faint crack of light at the base of the wall. Brenda didn't say a word throughout the afternoon. She went in and out, cleaning the small office, flipping the old display tables, collecting the last valuable items left. A tarnished silver locket, an old half-empty perfume bottle, a few old photos of her late husband, yellowed. She didn't shed tears. She just wrapped them up carefully, like someone who had survived dozens of escapes. Leo wasn't asked anything. He didn't dare. But the atmosphere in the shop that day was unlike any other day before. No more cursing, no more sounds. Of the ruler hitting the table, just a prolonged silence, like the wind before a storm. In the evening, Brenda brought back 2 new sets of clothes, cheap but without any signs of wear. She gave one set to Leo, ordering, "Change into it." Leo took the unfamiliar clothes. The dark trousers were shorter than any trousers he had ever worn. The shirt had a zipper and a hood. He didn't understand, but still followed the order. After that, she dragged him into the small back sink area, sat him down on a stool, and pulled out the dull iron scissors from the cabinet. She cut his hair without warning. Brenda cut his hair with impatient strokes of the scissors. Hair fell in clumps to the floor. A lock caught on Leo's shoulder. He didn't brush it off. Looking at himself in the broken mirror, he saw a strange face with a bare forehead and eyes no longer hidden. "No one will recognize you," Brenda muttered behind him. Leo still didn't react, but a question popped up in his head. "If no one recognizes me anymore, then who will look for me?" Late at night, Leo was woken up by a violent tug. "Take your things," Brenda ordered. "We're leaving." He didn't ask where. Brenda didn't say. He only saw her bring a big bag with some papers and a strange passport, a different name, a photo, cut from somewhere and pasted on. Leo didn't sleep all night. While Brenda was busy packing, he sat in the dark, holding a small piece of paper, writing quickly. "If anyone asks, I'm not going with her. I don't agree." He folded the piece of paper very small, sewing it hidden into the hem of his new shirt, with blue thread, the very thread he had used to make fur for the creature. A taxi carried them through the empty streets, towards the international bus terminal. Leo sat in the back seat, not speaking. Outside, street lights swept across his face in short bursts, light then dark, like a slow-motion film. At a red light intersection, a school bus passed by. On the bus, children waved, shouting to each other through the glass. Leo looked, not blinking. He wasn't jealous, not sad. He just quietly touched the hem of his shirt, as if to check the piece of paper was still there, and his decision had not been taken away. Brenda gasped, checking her watch. "Go faster!" she urged the driver. "The last trip is at 10:15, when—" They arrived at the bus terminal. She pulled Leo out of the car, walking very fast. Not much luggage, just a backpack and an old paper bag. Leo didn't resist, but he was no longer the child being dragged aimlessly. He was counting each step, not to run away, but to wait for the right moment. In his head, the image of Eleanor appeared like a stake tied to the edge of a cliff. He didn't know her name, had no information about her, but he knew she was the first person to stop when she saw him being beaten. And someone like that surely wouldn't turn away when he needed her. He had seen her through the crack in the curtains, only fleetingly, but that look was enough for him to believe she wasn't like the others, not asking if he was okay, not hastily promising anything. She just stood there, not turning away. And for Leo, standing still in a world where everyone leaves was an act with a weight equal to love. At the bus terminal, the white lights were as bright as day. Announcements were constant. People dragged suitcases hurriedly. Brenda squeezed Leo's hand tighter every time he slowed down. Brenda pulled him hard. Leo didn't react. He just turned, his head looking around. Leo stood next to Brenda, near the ticket check area. His hand was being held tightly, the knuckles turning purple under the pressure. Under the cold fluorescent light, he looked up. The electronic board flashed red. Letters, departure. There was no one for him to wave goodbye to, no one waiting for him at the destination. And if he got on this bus, maybe no one would ever see him again. Brenda pulled hard. "Go," she said quietly through gritted teeth. Leo followed, but each step was a distance closer to disappearing completely. The line was silently queuing in, front of security. Leo tried not to shake, but his hands were no longer his own. A strange feeling as if his body was being controlled by someone else, a puppet being led through each knot. His eyes scanned around, not searching for a familiar face, just hoping some eyes would know who he is. In his pocket, the hem of the paper he was hiding remained still, rubbing lightly against his hand each time he moved. The paper has never been read, but he knows the content of each letter. They are the only resistance he has before everything. Belongs to others. Brenda jerked his hand one more time as the loudspeaker rang. "Passengers on Intercity Bus 2215 to Mexico City, please go to the check-in area." The sound was like a starting gun. Leo was pushed towards the security gate. A uniformed person checked the papers. Brenda handed over a passport. Fake. She knew the name on it wasn't his, the picture wasn't his, but people don't know. People won't ask. A second before passing through the scanner, Leo stopped. He couldn't hear anything anymore. All the sounds were strangled as if in water. The crowd blurred. His eyes flickered, but only one thing remained clear. The hem of the shirt, where the paper was hidden. He reached out to grasp it. "Go!" Brenda snapped louder. She leaned down and whispered, "If you don't go, you're dead to me." But Leo wasn't afraid anymore. A hot flash spread up his chest, ran through his throat, touched the vocal cords that had been silenced for too long. He didn't know where he got the breath from. Just knew that if he didn't speak now, he would never hear his voice again. And then, "I don't want to go with her." The scream rang out, not loud, not sharp, but clear, decisive, like a knife cutting in half the invisible string that had bound him for so many years. A moment of silence enveloped. Then everything stirred. The people in front turned around. The security guard was stunned. An old woman pulling a suitcase stopped in midair, agape at the short-haired boy standing tremblingly next to a stern-faced woman. Leo stood straight, his hand still grasping the hem of his shirt, not running away, not retracting his words. A bus terminal employee approached, his voice low but resolute. "What's going on here?" Brenda was about to answer when Eleanor stepped out of the crowd. No introduction was needed, no names, just her standing there. Tall, calm, her eyes not leaving Leo. And for the first time, the boy stepped towards her. Not waiting for anyone to call. Not asking if he was allowed, just stepping forward, step by step, as if taking himself out of hell. Sarah followed closely behind, handing the file to the bus terminal employee. A few minutes later, 2 more people from the internal security office showed up. Brenda was asked to produce papers. She flustered, still yelling that Leo is my child, that he's just panicked, that he's sick, but no one believed her anymore. Because the child had spoken, and that voice was real. Leo stood next to Eleanor. She didn't touch him, didn't say, "Well done," didn't comfort him. She just stood, letting him know he was no longer alone. He looked up at her. Eleanor nodded slightly. There was no need to say anything. That nod was the final confirmation. "I see you now. From now on, no one will make you disappear again." A female employee took Leo to a spare chair, pouring water. He didn't drink. He just sat there, looking at his hands, his fingers shaking but no longer purple, shaking with release, with crossing the threshold, because he had just broken the cage that no one saw. But he had been in for so many years. When the police arrived, Brenda was no longer yelling. She just sat down on the bench, her face pale. She didn't look up at Leo once more. She knew the only thing that had kept her safe before was the silence of that boy, and now when that voice rang out, she had nothing left. On the way out of the bus terminal, Leo turned back. The people who had been standing there were still looking at him, not pitying, not curious, but as if they had just seen something very real, very old, very much in need of protection. He took Eleanor's hand, not being dragged, but voluntarily, following. For the first time, he left a place without feeling like he was being left behind. Leo's new home was at the end of a quiet, tree-lined street, far from the bustling city center. The house wasn't big, but had a small garden in the back, windows facing the morning light, and especially no locks in the bedroom. Eleanor intentionally left it that way. The day Leo was brought here, she didn't ask him if he was afraid, didn't suggest what he should call her. She just said softly, as the wind brushed through his newly regrown hair, "Here, you don't need to do anything to be at peace." The first week, Leo didn't say much. He slept close to the edge of the bed, not daring to lie in the middle even though the mattress was very soft. The pillow smelled of soap. He still lay on his side, like in the old room, as if ready to roll off the bed if someone walked in. Some nights, Leo woke up in the middle of the night. The window wasn't closed tight. The wind blew, making the curtains flutter. He startled, shrinking, listening to every sound. A small click in the kitchen, just the water bottle expanding from the cold. But he couldn't fall back to sleep. He pulled the blanket over his head, leaving only a small gap to breathe, like he used to do whenever he was afraid of Brenda opening the door unexpectedly. Each morning, Eleanor left a glass of warm milk and a small piece of bread on the dining table, not calling, not waiting. If he didn't touch it, she didn't ask why. The kitchen light was always on all night. He didn't know she did it on purpose. But on the third night, Leo first tiptoed down to the kitchen, sitting and stealing. A leftover cookie, still according to old habits, eating slowly, cautiously, his hands hugging his body. The next morning on the dining table was a small piece of paper neatly written. "If you're hungry, eat any time. No one keeps records here." That lunchtime, Leo smiled for the first time, even if it was just a pursed lip, when he saw the piece of bread with a small toothpick stuck in it, like a candle. Eleanor pretended not to see, but in her heart, a silent joy arose. That pursed lip, for her, was more radiant than any laughter. There was a wardrobe in Leo's room. The wardrobe was white with round porcelain knobs, stickers of small stars. But for many days he didn't touch it, just looked from afar. Every time he passed by, he felt his heart beat fast, as if just opening it, something would burst out, forcing him to pay the price for the good thing he had. Eleanor never touched the wardrobe. She left it there as if understanding that the wardrobe door would only be opened when he was ready, not sooner, not later. One sunny morning, Leo found a box of crayons in the drawer. The metal box was worn. At the corners, the lid a bit sticky, but inside there were enough colors. He sat by the window starting to draw. The first picture was streaks of color. The second picture had a sky. By the third picture, he drew the entrance to the bus terminal, but no buses. Just a woman standing by the light board, her hands in her pockets, looking into the distance. At first, he hid the paintings under the mattress, afraid that someone would see them and punish him. But then, when he finished drawing the woman standing, waiting at the bus terminal, he put the picture on the table, not asking permission, not hiding, just putting it there like a first word he dared to say, in color. The painting wasn't signed, but when Eleanor saw it being put on the wall, she just nodded, not asking, not commenting. She understood because sometimes silence is the first language of trust. Leo started writing letters, not long, just a few lines written to Ben. He didn't send them because he wasn't sure if his friend was still at the old house, but each time he finished writing, he felt a little lighter. I think the light doesn't hate me. Before I thought I was being punished, so I was in the dark. But now I know the light is still there. I just haven't dared to come out yet. One afternoon, Leo went for a walk with Eleanor to the small stream behind the house. The water flowed slowly past the rocks. The grass on the bank swayed gently in the wind. He carried a small wooden box, not telling her what was inside. When they reached the log bridge across the stream, Leo stopped. His hand trembled as he opened the lid. Inside was the old fabric creature, the one he used to hug every night in the room without a window. He touched it one last time, stroking the worn threads that had faded, then gently dropped it into the water. The creature floated on the surface for a moment, spinning a few times as if waving goodbye, then floated away, disappearing after the small bend. Eleanor didn't ask what it was. Leo didn't need to say who it was, but in his eyes, for the first time, there was a space that had been cleaned. No longer the shadow of fear, no longer the breath of the controller. The trial of Brenda Jenkins took place on a March morning in a small room of the local courthouse. Outside, the cold wind blew through the old wooden benches. Inside, no one spoke loudly. Even the chairs were pulled lightly, as if everyone knew that silence at this time was more important than outrage. Leo was present at his own request. No one forced him to come. Eleanor even wanted to hide him from the trial, so he wouldn't have to witness anything uglier again. But Leo said in a decisive tone that she had never heard from him, "I want to know how much she will lie." And Eleanor understood. This wasn't for revenge, but to close. Brenda entered with her hands cuffed in front of her stomach. She didn't mope, didn't cry, didn't bow her head. She just stood straight, as if attending a meeting. When asked, she answered in a steady voice, as if recording, "I raised him from a young age. No one helped. No one thanked me. He didn't need to go to school. He could learn at home, too. I was just holding the money for him. I would give it back when he was old enough. We went abroad because the environment was better. I didn't do anything wrong." Not once in her testimony did she call Leo by name, just it, the boy, that child. Leo sat in the last seat. He didn't cry, didn't shrink, didn't cover his face like in the old days. He just looked straight at the woman standing in front of the dock. His eyes had no resentment and not a look of victory. It was silent but decisive, as the last door was closed, never to be opened again. Beside him, Eleanor sat still, but her hand rested on Leo's thigh, warm and steady. When the court allowed the victim to submit a personal letter instead of direct testimony, Leo stepped up. He didn't speak, just handed over the small envelope, in which was the piece of paper he had hidden in his shirt. "If anyone asks, I'm not going with her. I don't agree." The judge read it aloud. The voice was not high, not dramatic, but in the courtroom, everyone seemed to stop breathing. It was no longer ink on paper, but a living testament to the fact that a child had screamed in silence. In the final arguments, lawyer Sarah gently turned her head, looking at Leo. Then she said, "Sometimes the most terrible thing is not the action, but the fact that a person can do all those things without feeling it's wrong." The sentence was pronounced 8 years in prison, no parole, along with a commitment to invalidate all financial rights related to Leo's inheritance. Brenda didn't yell, didn't protest. She just smirked, like smiling or like sneering. Leo watched her being escorted out of the room. For a very short moment, their eyes met. Leo didn't bow his head. When it was all over, Leo stepped out into the courthouse yard where the sun had begun to rise. Eleanor quietly handed him a bottle of water. He opened the lid, took a sip. The wind blew through his shoulders, but for the first time, he didn't feel cold. "Are you okay?" she asked. Leo nodded, not nodding just to get it over with, but nodding to say that what needed to be faced, he had looked straight at it. That evening, when he got home, he opened the wardrobe. Nothing happened. No one walked in. No screaming. Just a gentle fragrance of new fabric and a row of neatly folded clothes. Leo tried on one, then stood in front of the mirror. He looked at himself for a long time, not to check if he was beautiful or not, but to check if this was real. He reached out to touch his face, not to wipe away tears because he wasn't crying, but to feel this skin, this face, this hair that was growing back. All were still here, and he was still a person, not an object to be hidden. At dinner that day, Leo sat at the table before the kitchen lights were turned on. He picked up vegetables, ate rice, drank water, not secretly, not awkwardly, not startled when Eleanor got up to get salt. When she returned to the table, Leo was still sitting there, straight back, hands on the table. A very small moment. But for Eleanor, it was the biggest answer to everything she had never asked. The yellow school bus slowly crossed the red dirt road. On both sides were fields of wheat that had just been harvested. On the bus, chatter was rife, interspersed with intermittent laughter. The children were excited for their first picnic after the spring break. Leo sat near the window, holding a worn beige backpack, his eyes looking outside. His short hair had grown evenly. His skin was tanned. His face was thin, but without the panic as before. On his wrist was a string tied from embroidery thread, light purple. Ben wove it for him this morning. "Good luck for your first day away," Ben said that, then secretly slipped into his hand a drawing. 2 houses, one big, one small, connected by a winding road. Below, his friend wrote in soft pencil, "We all have a home." Leo didn't answer. He just smiled lightly and truly. He folded the drawing, put it in his pocket, touched it one more time before getting on the bus. "We all have a home." That sentence made him confused, because before he thought home was a place to hide, but now he found himself wanting to come back. Not because he was forced, but because he knew there would be someone waiting. The trip wasn't long. The school chose a picnic area in the suburbs with a lawn, a small playground, and a few ancient trees providing shade. The children divided into groups to play sports, tug-of-war, tag, ring toss. Leo chose the ring toss game. At first, he threw crooked. The children burst out laughing. He wasn't angry, also didn't retreat. On the 3rd try, the plastic ring fell right on the top of the pole, and a round of applause rang out. Someone shouted, "Hit it!" Leo smiled a real smile, not wary, not afraid, not looking around to see who was watching him. When the children ran towards the dining table, Ben took his hand. "You throw better than last time." Leo didn't answer, just bowed his head, but his fingers didn't let go. That handshake, for the first time in a long time, wasn't squeezing, wasn't pulling, but was holding back. In the distance, Dr. Evelyn Reed stood by the row of trees holding a notebook. She had applied to volunteer back at the local school, and today was the first day she returned in the role of observer. When she saw Leo hit the ring, she startled, not because of the throw, but because that smile, shining like the sun breaking on the water, a smile that she thought would never be on that face again. Evelyn turned away. Tears fell on her wrist, not because of sadness, but because in the end that child had not been swallowed. At lunchtime, Leo sat next to Ben under a tree. The lunchbox he brought had peanut butter sandwiches, a few slices of apple, and a paper carton of milk. Eleanor told him that he could change the dish if he didn't like it. But today he ate it all, not because he was hungry, but because he no longer had to hide food for tomorrow. When the picnic ended, The children got on the bus one by one. The moans of "too soon" rang out, but none of the children were angry for long. Just a lollipop or a new joke, and they had already forgotten. Leo sat next to the window like when he came, but this time he didn't look far away. He looked towards the school gate where the bus would stop in a few minutes. He looked down at his new sneakers, the kind with laces. He still didn't know how to tie them tightly. Eleanor had to help in the morning, but she said, "It's okay. You just practice today." He tied them himself, a little crooked, a little loose, but they were his own. The bus stopped in front of the gate. The teacher went around reminding the children to check their belongings, clothes, socks, then asked each of them, "Who's picking you up?" To avoid confusing people, when she reached Leo, she asked quietly in a soft voice, no different from how she asked the other children, "Leo, who's picking you up this afternoon?" She thought he would hesitate, thought he would point, thought he would bow his head. But Leo looked up, his eyes bright in the afternoon sun. His face was not timid and not too tough, just an 8-year-old boy, normal as he should always have been. And he replied in a clear, steady voice, "My mom is waiting for me at the gate." No one asked more, no one needed to explain. The woman, standing on the other side of the fence, her hair pulled back elegantly, her tailored jacket dark, holding a bottle of water, didn't need papers to prove her role because Leo had called. And calling is choosing. Dr. Evelyn Reed stood behind her, hand lightly gripping the back of the seat. She didn't push forward, didn't come closer, just looked like she used to look at Leo through the community center window in the old days. Ben waved when Leo got off. Leo waved back, but his eyes didn't leave that familiar shape, the shape that had been waiting, not urging, not impatient, as if she had always been standing there, just waiting for him to be ready. When Leo stepped out of the gate, Eleanor held out her hand. Not hugging, not carrying, just holding out her hand like a parent holding out their hand to welcome their child home. And Leo, without hesitation, put his hand in hers. Holding her hand, he didn't think about the trip and didn't remember the old shop. He just thought, now it's afternoon and someone has been waiting for me. The waiting was not a reward, but an affirmation that he was worth someone waiting for. Everything had started again, not with a sentence, not with a triumphal trumpet, but with a small call, light but big enough to end a journey full of darkness. My mom is waiting for me at the gate. The story of Leo, Eleanor, and the silent people like Marcus, Evelyn, and Sarah is not a story about a magnificent rescue. It is a reminder that sometimes, to change the life of a child, you don't need a miracle. Just a long enough look, a deep enough question, and a person who refuses to turn away. And if you, the one who has patiently read to this line, have ever felt like you were forgotten, ever wanted to scream but no one heard, or ever thought that your voice wasn't loud enough for anyone to listen, please remember that as long as there is one person who believes you have value, then you are not invisible. Thank you for staying. I hope you leave with something left in your heart, not pain, but tenderness, because sometimes the most beautiful thing is not to be seen, but to be seen through and still be loved.